Discover the power of one.
I don't pretend to be the guy who can win first place in this deal. I'm going to be a little bit like the blind discus thrower who's going to work really hard to keep your attention, though. And so we got a PowerPoint we're going to show you, and I'm the guy who brings in the politics. And I know we've been taught that politics is a dirty word. I know we had a presidential candidate who went around and saying poly is many and tick means bloodsuckers. I agreed. But I got to tell you, what Pastor Mark's done here with this vision, I want to take to every state and educate people, don't y'all? Because we can't just bounce around our echo chamber and talk to each other. We have to duplicate our efforts or we're going to continue to lose the culture war. And so I'll give you a little bit about my story, and we're going to do a PowerPoint and go through some stuff. I recognize I have a unique view in what's going on. So I'm the guy who grew up in a little town called Prosperity, South Carolina. Have y'all seen the sign? It's a road sign that says Clinton to the left and Prosperity to the right. When you see that sign, that's where I live. And so Prosperity's home about 400, counting all the dogs and cats. It's not a big place. I live right there right now. It's a wonderful little slice of Americana. Never doubted my Christianity, my faith, my pastor, my mom and dad. Got to Clemson. I got my degree in engineering in 1985. But my freshman year, my dad had lost his career to downsizing, and so I had to work my way through college. Now, thank the Lord, they paid for most of it, but I worked 4 jobs. I flipped burgers at McDonald's. I worked in the civil engineering laboratory. I joined the ROTC and the National Guard. So my first semester at Clemson, I'm running around campus as a ROTC cadet getting booed 6 years after Vietnam and all that debacle. You know, baby killer, warmonger, we hate you. 6 or 8 months later, I got cheered. And I didn't know what it was, but it was the first time in my life I stopped and wondered, why do I believe what I believe? And why am I right? Why is my dad right about patriotism in America and how special it is? And I started connecting the dots, and it was Ronald Reagan's message. It made me a conservative because he never apologized for his faith. He never apologized for his conservative values, and he never apologized for America. And so my response was, I want to get involved. And my prayer with the girl I met, Michelle, that swept me off my feet was, we want to make a difference. I didn't know how to define that. I didn't know what I meant, what it meant for me, not short-term or long-term. We started knocking doors. We started doing phone banking. We started waving signs for people that we believed in office, believing in the biblical worldview. And I know what that was back before I heard Alex McFarland and David Noble and others talking about worldview. I just thought we as Christians were to be salt and light. And for salt to be salty, it had to actually interact with the thing that wasn't salty. For us to be light, we had to be bright light so people saw it in the place that was dark. And so I didn't really know how to respond. Michelle and I just tried. I wrote a book on American Christian history. I was speaking. I ran for state senate and lost. God used that, and I got to tell you, I believe it was an act of obedience because I didn't want to do it. I negotiated with God. He walked me through the whole thing. I'd love to tell you the whole story sometime because I know you've never negotiated with God. You've never told God what you were going to do or what was best for you. And he showed me through me laying out some fleeces that I was supposed to run for state senate, assuming that I was going to run because I was going to win. Well, I lost. And I got a really good dose because when you lose, everybody voted for you. Y'all experience this? We voted for you. You were fantastic. We voted for you. We love you. And if everybody who was in a church told me they voted for me, I would be in the state senate in South Carolina today. There's a bunch of liars is what I found out. But I also believe that everything I'm doing now nationally began with that. And it wasn't about winning. It was about being obedient. It was a little bit like God tapped me on the shoulder and say, are you willing to do this right now? Are you willing to step up and stand in the gap and do more than your part? Because we all assume what our part is, right? A few years later, I was out speaking on my book and everything. My wife experienced a deep depression. Long story short, 10 years ago, about 3 weeks ago, she took her own life. Left me a single dad with 2 little boys wondering, what am I going to do? And still, God tapped me on the shoulder. Hey, I got you. Romans 8:28 hit me in the face that day. I don't know about you, but I've read the scriptures at times and wondered what I read, and other times it almost broke my nose off. And that day it was Romans 8:28. And I said, God, I do. I believe you. Because he asked me, did you believe it yesterday? Yes, Lord. You got to believe it today. And I was like, Lord, all things. I met a wonderful girl who was widowed by suicide as well. She had 2 little girls. I've watched God work in my life. It's a little bit like sitting over here a little bit ago and listening to Bill Federer and going, Thank you, Lord. I remember sitting in these audiences wondering, man, will I ever get to meet that guy? You know, will I ever get to meet a Mark Cowart? And God's got you here tapping you on the shoulder going, what are you supposed to do with this? How do we respond to what's going on in our nation? How do we keep what we have that's so special? A few years later, I felt led to run for state party chairman in South Carolina. I ran as a Christian who was a conservative who happened to be a Republican. I said, if you're wearing my uniform and you run the ball the wrong direction, it'll be me who tackles you. The legislature didn't like that very much in South Carolina. Now, we're red with a little bit of red on the side, but, you know, I got thrown into the thrust of the presidential preference primary. South Carolina was first in the South, and so we were in everything that you see. We're the first presidential preference primary in South Carolina, and I get a front row seat. I did every political TV show you can name. I think my staff said like 57. I did everything on the left from Al Sharpton and Piers Morgan to Megyn Kelly on the right and everything in between. And I learned something really important that I'd always heard and thought. The left and most of the media aren't just unfriendly to what you believe and what Alex and Bill and David Barton were telling you. They're hostile to what you believe. When they'll curse in your earbud when you're getting ready to go on, you kind of realize they're really against you. But I also had some other experience in that. I sent 1,400 volunteers from South Carolina to 8 battleground states. We even sent a few people out here to knock on doors and just do what they had to do. So I got this front row seat. When we lose, I go see Chairman Priebus. I fuss about it because I recognize we left out the faith community. It wasn't the party so much, it was the campaign. They assumed. I was in a room with a very famous consultant who used the whiteboard. You see him on Fox News all the time, and I won't mention his initials or anything, but y'all know who I'm talking about. And he says, somebody asked him a question in this chairman's meeting. There was only 50 of us. It was all the chairman. And they said, what are we going to do about the evangelicals? And he said, what are they going to do? They're going to vote for us. And I said just out loud, they're going to stay home. And it just so happens at the time I was teaching a book called Think Like Jesus in my Sunday school class. David Barton mentioned George Barna. Bill, others have mentioned George Barna. He just emailed me. He got my email today. He's become a great friend. But his book, Think Like Jesus, I think is something we all need to take some information from. It's not an issue like, here's the issue. We're all confused. How do we handle this? It's not, what do the polls say or what the experts say? What's God say about this? So I'm teaching them this in my class, and I realize this is the problem. We've stopped looking at things through a biblical worldview. In fact, we've lost our ability because the media has defined for us, and the left has defined for us, oh, you Christians are, man, you're good at evangelism and missions, and that vacation Bible school is terrific. My kids love it, but you shouldn't be involved in politics. That might offend somebody. And we're good at turn the other cheek, Jesus. We don't want to offend nobody. And I believe we're in a time we better find our turn the tables over Jesus. We're losing our culture. And you know what, though? It's like all these speakers have told you. It's our responsibility. So I get this view. I go see Chairman Priebus. He's a believer like us. I said, you know, the people that we need to talk to in the churches, I start looking at numbers I'm going to give you. I start looking at the way the media's treated us, how the party's treated us. And I believe there's a time right now that the church would reemerge into a place of significance. We've allowed ourselves, we've created the backseat for ourselves. That's why I love what Pastor Mark's doing. I'm so honored and humbled to be a part of this. Because see, the political world and the spiritual world really haven't meshed, and it's our fault. The politicos aren't going to come and meet you because you're in church unless it's election time. Let's just face it. Most of them don't have our worldview. It's not their fault, that's ours. So we as Christians, we as believers with a biblical worldview, it is incumbent upon us to go and penetrate and immerse this political world. So Wright's offered me a job. He said, look, I want you to be our first ever. You can call it what you want. He wanted me to live in D.C. I turned him down because we were putting a new family together, and I said, I'm not putting my kids in D.C. Sorry, man. I ran for re-election in May of 2013. I got re-elected, and he calls me back, and he said something I think is profound and I've thought a lot about and I've prayed a lot about. He said, you know, you're an odd duck in this deal, which is sad, isn't it? He said, you love the Lord and you understand the political process. He said, campaigns and candidates have done faith outreach. I want you to be our first ever full-time. I want you to go do this. I stepped down as chairman in June. I became the National Director of Faith Engagement, they call it, July 1st, 2013. I've been to 40 states. I've now spoken to right at 70,000 pastors, faith leaders, some rabbis, some priests, and anybody who'd stand still. And I want to give you that perspective today because I believe it's not about the party, it's about the principles. And see, I think it goes back to what we know already, but I want to show you how the media treated this. And this is how the media defines it. And by the way, when you see numbers of evangelicals or born-agains or Christians, understand the numbers are cloudy because the politicos use the numbers the way they want them to fit. And Barna's are the best. Then they're cloudy because Pew has definitions and Gallup has definitions. I use Barna's stuff. It's the highest threshold. In 2004, then they used the white evangelical. And now when you look at my other numbers, I'm just going to talk about church going because George Barna defines them as SageCon, spiritually active, governance engaged. That's people like me and you. That's people sitting in the church who care about this and they vote. But let's look at what the media said. In 2004, 86% of the people, white evangelicals, voted for the most conservative candidate, the R. It was 23% of the total vote. The media said it's an imposing force. Those Christians, they're an imposing force, and Bush won. In 2006, it was 70% R, those people sitting in pews. It was 24% of the total vote. In 2010, 77% of them went for the R. It was 25% of the total vote. Look at 2014. 78% of them voted for the R. It was 26% of the total vote, and the media said a diminishing influence. Let me tell you why. And this is what people don't understand, but look what it led to. Look what that activity led to. And by the way, I'm the ultimate parties don't make a difference. Parties are only comprised of the people who sit in them. So it's not about the party. It's easy to blame the party or the candidate or the person that's running, the elected official. It's our responsibility. We need to look at it that way. But I'm going to speak from the perspective of a party because let's face it, only one party is the natural home of people for people of faith. The other party, the pendulum has swung. I don't know how long it's going to be before that party cares about the unborn or marriage or Christian values again. The one place we as Christians can make a difference, it's only one party that can happen in right now. That's just the way it is. So what we have to do is make an influence there the best way we know how. 54 senators, it was a +9. 247 House seats, most since 1932, +13. 31 of 50 governors, added 1. 69 of 99 legislative chambers are in the most conservative hands. 24 were trifectas, governorship and the state legislative control of the House and the Senate. That is people in the state speaking and not even understanding the kind of power that they hold. Look at the state legislatures. The conservative bent, just like these guys just gave you some numbers about that. David Barton said only 3 states do liberals outnumber conservatives. We as conservative Christians can own this deal again if we would just remember and recognize the kind of influence we have. We've been pushed aside and marginalized, and we have accepted it. It's not that we've lost the battle, we've left the game. We're not even on the battlefield anymore sometimes, y'all. And so this is good news, right? This is good stuff. And as I tell the party people all the time, this is not outreach, this is the base, man. This is who we are. This is the biggest part of the entire conservative movement is people who are sitting in churches on Sunday. 52% of all Republican voters on November 8th, they've already predicted it, fall into a conservative Christian category. That's Protestants, that's Catholics, that's weekly churchgoers. They care about what goes in their country. That's a big chunk. It's 32% of the total vote. It is the largest voting segment in the entire electorate. So when the media or the experts or the pundits or the polls tell you you don't matter, that is a voter suppression effort. They would like to discourage you. That's what the enemy does. The devil used discouragement to make us go, yeah, we can't make a difference. Yeah, they've already voted. They already called the election. I'm in Colorado. It's already over. They called it already. I'm disgusted by that happening. We cannot allow that to move us. We have a biblical obligation to vote and engage. In 2014, these were the numbers. 86% of those sitting in churches voted for the most conservative candidate. 52% of all our voters, 32% of the entire electorate. That is a big deal in our numbers. Then you look at it this a little deeper, because we don't recognize the influence we have. We have given it up ourselves. We've abdicated and given it away. There's only 2 things that matter to politicians, just 2. They care about money, donations, and they care about the vote. When we don't give money, and y'all know this, I talk to donors all the time. I was a state party chairman. I did dialing for dollars every single day. The Christian community is not known for the place where the money comes. The money comes from donors who aren't involved in churches and aren't typically a tither or a donor this way. So we don't have influence that way. We don't put our vote out there. We lose every ability to move the politicians, and it's our fault. They're only actors on the stage playing to an audience. I love Russell Kirk. I'm rereading his book right now, The Conservative Mind, that he wrote a long, long time ago. And he said, politicians are only actors on the stage playing to an audience. If that's true, and we're not even in the audience, how do we blame them? How do we blame parties or politicians or elected officials if we're not even in the audience? And I'll give you some numbers. 82 million people sitting in churches on Sunday, typically in America. 82 million. Let me tell you how big a deal that is. That's bigger than the Hispanic vote, the union vote, the black vote, and the gay vote combined. Combined. Did y'all hear that? Combined. Now, if you listen to the news and the pundits, they'll tell you that there just aren't as many Christians. Pew loves to run that poll. And what they really identified was there's a whole lot less people who aren't serious about their faith. But the ones who are actually serious about their faith, if you go to like paragraph 12 in that article that everybody pushed out there, paragraph 12 says the evangelicals, the conservative Christians, have grown. It's the groups who've identified as Christian, like Alex was talking about a little bit ago. The people who really aren't serious about their faith, those numbers have gone down. And a lot of mainline denominations have gone way down in their numbers. But out of those 82 million people sitting in churches, about 30 million, by anybody's definition, that's all that voted in 2012. 6 million of those voted for a guy who doesn't even agree with life begins at conception and babies in the womb matter. A guy who said marriage between one man and one woman is foundational to my Christian faith. And then I guess when God changed his mind, so did the president. Because God didn't change his mind. 6 million people sitting in churches were so uninformed or so misinformed that they voted for a guy who didn't even agree with the basics. Hello? When I was on the Huckabee show, I said somewhere between, and this is Barna's numbers, somewhere between 55 and 58 million people sitting in the church didn't go vote in 2012. And I got all this pushback from the Rove crowd and the experts, and it's not that high. So I started saying between 40 and 50 million, which by the way is still a big number. 40 and 50 million people sitting in the pews with you did not bother to go vote in 2012. Now, I got to tell you, I'm not a pastor. I'm a Sunday school teacher, a deacon, chairman of our church council kind of deal. I told my Sunday school class a few weeks ago, the Planned Parenthood stuff disgusts me. It's unbelievable that a thinking person could think that's okay. Talking about, because the baby doesn't have value, but the parts do, that's unbelievably stupid to me. And by the way, if you're wrong on life, you're pretty much wrong in my book. I can go check all the other boxes, and if you're wrong on life, you're going to be wrong on those as well. No matter what it is. I'm upset about the Planned Parenthood videos, judges redefining marriage. I'm upset about giving Iran $150 billion to build a bomb to destroy Israel. I'm upset about all these things, but ultimately, when I look at numbers like this, I'm upset at me. Because I believe a guy died on a cross to take away the sins from me and the world. And that's an individual responsibility. And I don't care how good a pastor you are, you can't get them to heaven unless that's an internal decision to accept Jesus died for their sins. And that's the way to heaven. As a believer, I got to believe and I got to understand that's my responsibility too. 40 to 50 million. We assume that the people we know and love and sit beside us in church are voting. It is a bad assumption from here on out. Do not allow yourself to do it. See, what we have is real leverage. And we don't even understand we have real leverage because we give it up so rapidly. We quit so easily. We don't impose ourselves. I learned this doing school choice in South Carolina. I worked on school choice for 12 years and mostly in the Southeast, but spoke all over the country about it. And I started realizing the way we have to do this is to get pastors and Christian schools and homeschool people to call the legislators and make themselves known. You know, I've gone all over the country now and I talk to legislators who are believers and they say, I never hear from pastors. I never hear from churches. They don't tell me what's going on. I don't hear their opinion. That's got to change, y'all, if we're going to have influence, because leverage comes from influence. Dr. Falwell said in the 90s, our problem is when we win, we quit, when we lose, we quit. We have to find a way to sustain it. And the main reason people vote to build that leverage is somebody they respect. Somebody they have in high esteem says, this is a big deal. See, I believe a pastor is the ultimate leader of that. David Barton told story after story after story about the sermons, the election sermons, the types of sermons, how pastors led in the community. When we wonder about why we aren't having community efforts that look good and look like things we'd appreciate and support, it's because we don't have enough pastors leading. I don't know how many different churches are here, but if everybody here doesn't take all this information back to your church and your pastor and create some pressure on that person to do the basics to get people involved, then this whole thing has failed. Because we need you. I can't do it by myself. These pastors, these leaders, these speakers can't do it by themselves. This has got to be a duplicated effort that we push this all over the nation to take our country back, because we know it won't last any other way. This is the time it's important. And back this up. I love what Finney says, and I know David Barton used this quote. I copied it from him. Brethren, our preaching will bear its legitimate fruits. If immorality prevails in the land, the fault is ours in a great degree. If there's a decay of conscience, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the public press lacks moral discrimination, and they do, the pulpit is responsible for it. If the church is degenerate and worldly, and it is, the pulpit's responsible. If the world loses interest in religion, the pulpit's responsible. If Satan rules in our halls of legislation, the pulpit is responsible. If our politics become so corrupt that the very foundation of our government are ready to fall away, the pulpit is responsible for it. Let us not ignore this fact, my dear brethren. Let us lay it to heart and be thoroughly awake to our responsibility in respect to the morals of this nation. And I told you in the letter I wrote, and then Pastor Mark let me put in the magazine, I want to challenge you. Because this is not about being passive. The time for games is over. I don't like being gone this much. It's the hardest part. Dana didn't like me taking this job. We prayed about it. We hit our knees. I had a spiritual mentor at the house when I accepted the job. And before my wife died, she had written scriptures before she got the depression. There's scriptures all over our house. She wrote like 62 scriptures under the floors and behind the walls and on the ceiling. Jeremiah 29:11 is in our den. Matthew 6:33, seek ye first, is in my office. Proverbs 22:6 in the kids' room. All over the house. Ephesians 3:20 is right beside the fireplace. And this mentor points and says, Dana, this would qualify with your husband being given a chance to change the conversation in America as exceedingly abundantly more than you can ask or imagine. You can't turn this down. We did our prayers yesterday before I left, and they were like, you got to be gone on your birthday. I know, it's tough. Well, you're missing our first day of school. I hate it. I'd rather be with them. Nothing against y'all, because I'm honored to be here. But I tell them that their futures are literally at stake. The country has gone off the rails. And it's because we're too passive. Our days for passivity are over. We need to get active. We need to decide that we're not going to sit back anymore and allow this to happen to us. And so I'm going to challenge you. Because we have to know, how do we create leverage? People say, I don't know how to do this. I can help you. We sent an email out just now. Peggy came up and said, that was pretty good. You sent an email out and you're sitting here in the conference. And, I've been working on that email for days and days. And so if you're not on our email, we just want to provide tools and resources. The party can't do this, but it's really basically this right here. Conduct a voter registration drive. Did you know in Colorado right now, I can give you the political perspective, they're about to write your state off because we're like 103,000 voter registrations down. Literally, everything's a resource decision, right? They got to make decisions. And I believe there's a silent majority out there who thinks they can't make a difference, who nobody's heard from. For this whole election, I've been saying, talking to the pollsters, you're pulling people who vote 3 or 4 out of 4 times. There are people now engaged who haven't voted in 6 cycles or 5 cycles, and they're not showing up. Let that be you. Let that be you motivating the person beside you in church to say, enough's enough. All your Facebook friends and all your family members, have you done a voter registration in your church? Now, we're not driving them. We don't have enough manpower. But, if you need a Christian kid from a high school or college, and Debbie Chavez is here somewhere, I bet she's putting together that kind of thing. Put them in the back of the place. If they know your name and address and phone number, it's not a big deal to do. But you need to do a voter registration drive in your church. We're trying to coalesce those into September. Pulpit Freedom Sunday, I think, is September 11th. So sometime in September, before all the deadlines pass for some of the states that have real tight deadlines, we want to show the party people. We want to show the media. And you know what? We want to show other Christians that we're out there. We want those election commission people to turn up and look at the numbers on October 1st and go, wow, what happened? Now, voter registration is not the real goal. Voter registration is just a way of talking about it, which leads me to number 2. Teach your people the issues. You just saw David did this. Alex talked about this. Bill Federer talked about this. We don't know the issues. I don't know if y'all watched that Man on the Street interview. I don't watch much TV. I think it was Jesse Waters. And he went to one of those institutions of higher learning, like Rutgers. I need to look this up and find out the exact one. But he asked 4 questions. Of 10 very smart college students at Rutgers, Ivy League, they're all smart. Number 1 question, who fought in the Civil War? 10 people, 0 got it right. None out of 10. Second question, what year did America get its independence? I didn't think this was a hard question. 1 out of 10 got it right. The number 1 answer was the 1960s. Third question, who do we get our independence from? Out of 10 college students at Rutgers, 1 knew the answer. Literally, the number 1 answer was Canada, because Canada's always been a powerhouse, ready to take over the world. It is funny. The 4th question was, what TV show did Snooki play in? 10 out of 10. Now, I got to tell you, until I was one of these things, and somebody came up, I couldn't have told you if a Snooki crawled, walked, flew, or drove in. Because I don't put that nonsense in my head. But all 10 of them knew the TV show Snooki played in. Pastors, leaders, Sunday school teachers, deacons, elders. If you consider yourself a child of God and you care about America, begin to teach people the issues. Learn how to articulate those ideas that make conservatism and faith the things that matter. Americanism, patriotism. Why do you do all these things? So they understand your point of view and they get it, that if the foundations be destroyed, what are the righteous to do? The foundations are being dug up every single day, and we're standing by and watching it happen. You know, if there were more Christians who understood this stuff, when an edict comes down from administration, you must let anybody go to the bathroom they feel like. If there was just a Christian with some backbone in the school board or the county council or even writing into the newspaper, they say, that's ridiculous. My little girls aren't going to the bathroom with somebody who decided a few minutes ago they're a woman for 10 minutes. Are you kidding me? That's like a siren call to be when a company, I don't care if Target says you can go to whatever bathroom. That's a signal to me. It's a code word. We don't want your business. It's just code. When my kids were young, they're now 19, 17, 15, and 14. When they were young, they get home from school in the summertime. Dad, I'm bored. That was code. Dad, I would like to pull the weeds, is what I told them. That's code. Bored means, Dad, I really want to pull your weeds outside. That's great. Now that I know the code, I can handle it. Target, I got your code. We don't want your business. But it's a whole different ball game when the government tries to coerce you to allow that because they decided that. We need you to teach on the issues. Talk to your family. My goodness, your kids and grandkids, don't lose them to the left and the secular humanists because you're not educating them. Number 3, encourage them to vote those issues. Lay them out. Go copy the platforms. You know, one of the things I was honored to do, David Barton was on the platform committee. Tony Perkins was on the platform committee. Chairman Priebus let me be the liaison between the policy writers and the people out in the committee. And this is all private, and I don't know this is going out there, but I'll tell you this story. So one of the policy writers told me we were winning everything like 90-10, everything. Then they said, look, why don't you tell your anti-LGBTQ crowd to stop spiking the football? And I was like, I'm not really sure what to say here, Lord. You better give me some words. And I said, why don't you tell your anti-traditional values crowd to realize they're beaten and stop grandstanding for C-SPAN? And I thought, maybe that's why I got to hang out here today. And one party passed the most pro-life, pro-family, pro-traditional values party platform ever passed in all of political history. I double dog dare you to find one better. But we need you to back up the platform. But if people don't get that, then lay them out and compare what the platforms mean and why they are. Because I got to tell you, the Republican Party is no more perfect than the Democrat or the Independent or the Libertarians. They're only made up, like Kirk said, of the people who were involved. Why wouldn't we take it back over? That is why I'm where I'm at. Number 4, sustain the pace, sustain the influence. We've lost it. We have to get it back. You know, I told Pastor Mark, sitting in his office, I don't know, a few months ago, we're going to do this. And we were talking about this, and I know this is hard to bring in something that's overtly political. But see, I don't believe this is political at all. I believe this is spiritual. If my God's big enough to be everywhere, and he is, then he's 365, 366 in a leap year. He's 24/7. He's all the time everywhere. If we let the other side define our influence and they say, well, you can be everywhere but there. Because that scripture about salt and light says, you know, don't be salt and light in the political arena. There's no comma there. There's no hyphen. There's no except for this. There's no exception. In fact, it says, if the salt were to lose its savor, its flavor, it's good for nothing to be trodden under the feet of men. I do not want to stand before the Father and be told I was good for nothing. I want to do my part right now, right here, for such a time as this, as Esther said in 4:14, as Mordecai told Esther in 4:14. What are we supposed to do? What's the tap on the shoulder for you today? The tap on the shoulder for me was, I travel a lot because I'm out talking to people because I can't do it by myself. The media is not going to help you. Go ahead and assume that most people in the political parties don't care about this. It doesn't even matter. What are we going to do about it? We've got to elevate our influence by sustaining the pace. Do you have a relationship with your congressman, your senator, your state house rep, your state senator? Have you ever called them? Have you ever gone and visited? Have you sent an email? Have you organized? You know what I used to do with Christian schools to try to get school choice passed? I'd sit there with the headmaster, with the pastor, and we would call the senators or the representatives' offices. And they would say, look, I represent a church of 200 families or 100 families or 500 families. And we can call you and Jane at home tonight and irritate you. Or you can just trust me that we're here and we care about this issue. We have to learn how to use our influence for the leverage we need. They don't believe we're out here. You know, I'm on both pro-life boards in South Carolina. I have been for 15 years. And every time we go to the lobby, there'd be 3 or 4 of us praying about whether it was a life issue or an anti-pornography or an anti-gambling, whatever we were fighting. There'd be 40 from the other side, well-dressed, sharp young men and women who are there lobbying those legislators relentlessly, just beating the issue like a rented mule. We don't do that. We've got to learn how to press in and do our part. Have you called? Have you visited them? Have you encouraged your congregations to engage on the issue? When's the last time, and I know Pastor Mark does this, if you're a pastor in here, if you're a deacon, you're an elder, you're somebody who has influence in your pastor's life, when's the last time that you took those issues that David Barton just talked about and you talked about them from the pulpit and then you taught your people how to make sure they understood this? We need to know that this is the most dumbed down generation in all of American history. It is by design. But look around here. Most of us are our age. We've got to get to the young people. We've got to get to the kids and the grandkids. We've got to get to the people that don't look like you and don't go to church like you and don't understand these issues because they have been lied to. People are on this unmistakable journey for truth. They're screaming for truth. It may be the best chance this fall because they realize Miss Clinton couldn't know the truth if it slapped her upside the head. They are searching for truth. You need to be a truth teller in people's lives. You need to be the person that carries it to them, as in Judges talked about. Put that trumpet before them, like Spurgeon said in morning and evening, and blast it out. Do it with love. Do it with grace. Do it with every bit of diplomacy you can do. But don't back down from the truth, because now's the time. I believe with all my heart, and I ask God all the time, Lord, why did you put me here? Why am I here doing this? I feel so overwhelmed, I don't even know how to see straight. I can't get to all the emails and the texts and the phone calls. I am laser beam focused on doing my part. But Lord, why'd you put me here? I'm reading Esther again. And I believe with all my heart, God has honored me and you to be right here, right now, to get the tap. What are you going to do with it? Thank you, brother. I'm honored. God bless you.